The funeral was nearly over when a gasp rippled through the mourners. Heads turned, eyes wide. Out of the mist and pine stepped a full-grown lion, muscles rippling beneath a golden coat, moving with the solemn grace of a soldier returning from war. No cage, no leash, just raw power and impossible purpose, walking straight toward the coffin. He lifted one massive paw, and what he did next silenced the entire forest. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jake Monroe wasn't searching for meaning anymore. After retiring from the fire department, he had retreated into the whispering solitude of the Everglade National Forest. Not for peace, but to disappear. Every creaking floorboard in his weather-worn cabin echoed with memories of what he'd lost. His wife, Emily, and their 7-year-old daughter, Grace, had been taken from him on a rain-slick highway 3 years prior. No flames were involved that day, only twisted metal and the bitter irony that a man who had saved hundreds from infernos couldn't save his own family from a hydroplane. Since then, he had built his days with the quiet efficiency of a man marking time, not living it. Until the morning, the forest cried out. He heard it first, an unnatural sound, jagged and desperate, slicing through the symphony of birdsong and wind. Jake followed it, machete in hand, down the overgrown trail behind his property. That's when he saw the cub, a lion no more than 4 or 5 months old, ensnared in a cruel tangle of barbed wire, blood matting its tawny fur. Its breathing was shallow, muscles trembling from shock. The cub's eyes locked with his, blazing not with rage, but with the terror of a creature betrayed by every living thing it had known. Jake's first instinct wasn't logic. It was memory. Grace's voice, soft as cotton, whispering stories of lions, her favorite animals. Her laughter as she roared like one, tiny hands curled like paws. That voice pushed him forward. He crouched low, murmuring softly, not words, but presence, vibration, tone, warmth. The lion flinched, snarled weakly, but didn't strike. Slowly, Jake's hands moved with the calm steadiness of a man used to pulling bodies from collapsed ceilings. The barbs bit into his skin as he unwound them, crimson drops splattering the leaves. When the final loop of wire came loose, the cub collapsed, too exhausted to flee. He carried it home. He named him Leo, not just for the obvious, but because something about the name sounded like hope. Leo was a skeleton with teeth, skin hanging loose over ribs, eyes dulled from trauma. Jake converted the shed into a den, filled it with thick blankets, a space heater, and the kind of quiet only the broken understand. At first, Leo fought. He wouldn't eat, lunged at Jake with cracked claws. But Jake never raised his voice, never retreated. Instead, he told Leo stories. Every night. About Grace's imaginary jungle, about the day he first held her, about the hole her death carved into his chest. The lion listened. Days turned to weeks, wounds scabbed, then vanished. The feral gleam in Leo's eyes softened into awareness, then recognition. He began following Jake from the shed to the porch, then to the edge of the woods, then everywhere. When Jake sat on the porch, Leo rested his massive head on Jake's lap, eyes closing not out of fatigue, but trust. By autumn, they were inseparable, man and beast, each scarred, each salvaged, each a quiet reminder that healing rarely comes loudly. The world might have labeled it madness, but within the hush of trees and the silent conversations of the soul, something sacred was taking root. Leo wasn't a pet, and Jake wasn't just a rescuer. They were two broken lives, slowly making each other whole, 3 years had passed like slow-moving mist over the Everglade canopy, and Jake Monroe had found something resembling peace. Not the kind sung about in hymns, but the hard-earned quiet of shared breath, of silent walks with a lion who had become his shadow. But serenity built outside the world's rules is always fragile. That fragility shattered the morning a letter arrived bearing a cold seal and colder words. Senate Bill 2437 rushed through after a viral incident involving an unlicensed cougar in another state made no room for nuance. It categorized all exotic wildlife as potential threats to public safety, regardless of circumstance or behavior. There were no exceptions, no grandfather clauses, no appeals. All lions, tigers, bears, and big cats, rescued or not, were to be confiscated and transferred to state-monitored sanctuaries within 60 days. Jake had read the letter 5 times before folding it in half with trembling fingers. He looked across the clearing, where Leo lay in the shade beneath the old cedar tree, eyes closed, belly rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. How could lawmakers, people who had never seen the way Leo paused before stepping inside the cabin, careful not to knock over Jake's tools, look at this creature and see only danger? 60 days passed like sand in a shattered hourglass. Jake made calls, filed petitions, sent emails that received only form replies. When the deadline expired, he stayed up the entire night, coffee untouched, the lamp buzzing softly over yellowed papers. He had no plan, only hope. The government agents arrived before sunrise. There was no knocking, only the gravel-crunching sound of tires and the silent, deliberate opening of SUV doors. 6 men in uniforms, flak vests, and neutral expressions fanned out across the lawn. One carried a tranquilizer rifle, another a thick binder. Jake stood barefoot on the porch, sleep-deprived and shaking. Not with fear, but fury held on a leash. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely, his voice breaking. "That lion out there is the only reason I'm still breathing. He's not a threat. He's my family." They didn't reply. The dart hissed through the air before Jake could speak again. It landed in Leo's left flank. Leo staggered, confused rather than alarmed, eyes wide as his legs betrayed him. He looked toward Jake, and in that gaze, there was no roar, no snarl, only a question, mournful and raw. "Why?" Jake ran, collapsing to his knees beside the lion's fading body. "I'm here," he whispered, pressing his forehead to Leo's, arms wrapped around the beast's great neck. "I'm here, buddy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They loaded Leo into a steel crate. He didn't fight. Jake didn't move as the convoy drove away, the silence left behind louder than any scream. After that, time lost meaning. Jake stopped picking up the phone. The porch plants wilted. The trails they once walked grew over with weeds. He didn't play music, didn't cook, didn't fix the broken window by the shed. But on the 3rd day of each month, he would sit at the kitchen table and write a letter. Always the same format. "Dear Leo," followed by fragments of their life, how the squirrels had returned to the feeder, how the autumn leaves smelled like cinnamon and ash, how the silence now ached in a different key. He knew Leo wouldn't read them, but he wrote as if the lion could hear. What Jake didn't know was that those envelopes marked "Forward to Sanctuary Administration" eventually landed on the desk of a young woman named Allison Moore, a junior caretaker at the Montana Wild Refuge. She didn't intend to read them aloud, at first, but one evening, standing by the fence of Leo's isolated enclosure, she unfolded one and spoke softly into the wind. Leo, long withdrawn and eerily silent since his arrival, lifted his head. Then he walked to the edge of the fence and sat, listening. And from that moment on, every month, he waited. The chapel was modest, built from old pine and humility, nestled at the edge of the forest where Jake had spent his last years. No fanfare, no long lines of mourners, just 5 souls in folding chairs. 2 retired firefighters who remembered Jake's quiet bravery during a warehouse blaze in '92, a grocer named Mark who used to leave overripe fruit for Leo on the back porch, and Allison Moore, who had flown in from Montana with a heart full of something heavier than grief. She had carried with her the final unfinished letter Jake never mailed. The sky was gray but dry, clouds hanging low like a quilt of stone. Wind stirred the leaves but left the crowd untouched, as if even the elements understood this gathering demanded stillness. The minister's voice trembled slightly as he read from Jake's eulogy, a simple reflection on a complicated man. There was no mention of Leo. No one quite knew how to frame the truth without sounding insane. And then, just as the final words were being spoken, he lived simply and he loved deeply. A sound broke through the silence. Gravel, shifting. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Too slow to be mechanical, too calm to be dangerous. Heads turned. Gasps. From the curve of the trail that wound past the tree line came a figure that didn't belong in this world, or at least not in this moment. Leo. Massive, muscular, majestic. His golden coat rippled under the dim light, eyes locked forward, not on the mourners, but on the casket at the center of the clearing. He walked without fear, without hesitation. No handlers, no harness, no evidence of confinement. Just raw intent and sacred gravity. People stepped back instinctively, but Leo did not pause. He crossed the grass with solemn grace and reached the casket, where he stopped. He lowered his head slowly, exhaled, then lay down, massive limbs folding beneath him, tail curling at his side. Then he did something no one could prepare for. He raised one paw, enormous and clawless, and placed it gently atop the wooden lid. A gesture not of dominance, but of recognition, of goodbye. A sound emerged from his chest, deep, tremulous. A low rumble that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a purr. It was morning. The sound of a soul too wild for words, yet too bound for silence. He stayed there, unmoving, eyes closed, body still but charged with presence. The mourners watched in awe, none daring to interrupt. Hours passed, and still he remained, a sentinel of grief. No one could explain how Leo escaped. No GPS tag, no broken enclosure was ever found. But that day, beside Jake's casket, it no longer mattered. Because in the union of man and beast, of loss and loyalty, a moment was born that defied explanation. And for those who witnessed it, belief in something greater than coincidence quietly returned. Leo never returned to the steel-fenced walls of the Montana sanctuary. There was no need. In the wake of that impossible funeral, public sentiment shifted like a tide unshackled. Footage had circulated, a grainy cell phone video captured from behind a tree line, showing the lion's final steps to the casket, the resting of that great paw atop wood, the stillness of a creature known for ferocity now stilled by love. It broke through news cycles, algorithms, cynicism. It made people feel again. Petitions flooded the governor's office. Allison Moore, who had stood beside Leo as he mourned, became an unlikely advocate, a voice trembling but resolute. And against all precedent, the state relented. A new designation was crafted: Honorary Companion Animal. The title was ceremonial in nature, but it carried legal weight. It meant Leo could stay, not in a cage, not under sedation, but in the only place that had ever felt like home. Jake's land, 10 acres bordered by pine and silence, was quietly transferred to a conservation trust in his name. Allison left her job at the sanctuary and moved into the cabin. She cared for Leo with the same diligence Jake once had, following the rhythm of his old routines, morning walks along the ridge, quiet evenings on the porch, the occasional tune from Jake's dusty piano echoing into the woods. But the world didn't forget. Months after Jake's passing, a small publisher took interest in a bundle of weathered, handwritten letters found on Jake's desk. The ones he had written to Leo. They were raw and unsparing, some only a few lines, others pages of reflection, regret, wonder. They weren't about lions or fame. They were about grief, about healing, about the strange grace of finding purpose, not in people, but in presence. To the King Who Healed Me was printed in a run of just 5,000 copies. It sold out in days. A national reprint followed, then translation rights, then a documentary. Every cent in profit went to wildlife rescue initiatives across the country, some of them now bearing Jake's name. Not out of obligation, but reverence. Years passed. Leo aged with quiet dignity. His gait slowed, his mane grayed, but his spirit, unyielding, solemn, loyal, never faded. When the day finally came, he lay down beneath the same cedar where Jake once found him napping, let out a single breath, and closed his eyes for the last time. Allison buried him beside Jake. 2 graves, side by side, one marked with a firefighter's emblem, the other with a bronze lion's head. Between them, nothing, just soft earth. But one morning, after a light rain, Allison noticed something. In the clay, right between the markers, a perfect paw print had formed, large, defined, impossibly detailed. No animal could have made it after burial. No weather could have preserved it so cleanly. It never washed away. No fence surrounds that spot. No sign explains it. Only those who know the story understand. Some love leaves scars, some love leaves paw prints,